Before presenting to you our wonderful guests who are going to be with us this morning, let me just share with you my gratitude for last night. I think for Spirit of Humanity, for the executive circle of the Spirit of Humanity and all the friends, it was really an important moment last night because this is the third forum, and last forum we were really feeling the need to connect with the Icelandic community because when we're sharing beautiful thoughts and feelings like we are together, I think we all have the need to feel that we're connected also, we're not just in our bubble, right? And I think last night was really fantastic. Apparently we were 450, which is fantastic. So many people from Reykjavik came. So thank you to you who came. Thank you to all the people from Reykjavik who came and those who invited them. Yes, I think we can applaud. And Mark and Nathanael, thank you again to our two film producers. Yeah, thank you, Mark and Nathanael. It's true that your generosity, which you always have on your hearts, allowed us to invite everybody, which was fantastic. Yesterday, in our plenary, we talked about how to unify when there's division. And today we're going to go down to communities. We're going to really look at, well, how's it happening? How's it unfolding very practically? How can we bring love and compassion in the work we are each doing every day? And a very deep question, very intense, which is through our duty of care, growing, I think we all agree that there's a growing collective awareness and consciousness. How can we change decision-making process in ways that express more love and foster compassion for each other? And how do we ensure our actions are shaped by our inner values and clear purpose? And this morning we have 4 people coming from 4 parts of the world, from China, from Pakistan, from England, and from Ghana and Africa, and I'd like to ask them all 4 to come up here. Thank you. And you can welcome them. So, let me present you to our 4 guests. This is the way we're going to live this panel together. So I will briefly present you to each of our 4 guests, and they will then share with you their journey, what they're doing, how they're living it. And then we'll have time, connection together, and you'll be able to ask your questions. So first, Baroness Sandip Verma from England. You came last night from London. Thank you very much for being here. And so you're chairperson of the European External Affairs and former minister in England of energy and climate change and international development. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Gulalai Ismail from Pakistan, and you're the chairperson of Aware Girls in Pakistan, and you're involved in peace building with young people who are at risk for radicalization. And your work is mainly in Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Emmanuel Bombande, who comes from Ghana.
Yes.
also very active in peace building. You're former Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration.
Yes.
And you're the co-founder West Africa Network for Peace Building, the WANEP.
Yes.
And also former chair of the board of the Global Partnership for Prevention of Armed Conflict. Thank you. And finally, we have you, Xia, with us,
Yes.
who is a researcher in education, and you work with the Academy of Educational Science in Beijing, and you have a PhD in pedagogy, and you're involved also in recommending policy in education in China.
Yes.
So as you can see, really a very rich panel with us this morning. So I'd like to start, Sandy, by you and ask you if you'd be willing to share with us your experience in our world today.
Thank you very much, Mark, and good morning to you all. And I'd like to start by, first of all, thanking you for organising this fantastic forum here. And for the start, I really enjoyed the meditation and starting the morning off in such a peaceful mode. And then the young people reminded me that there is still much hope in sometimes what appears in the world as a state of hopelessness. And, you know, all around us, we've seen the rise of the so-called movement of populism and the movement of making people feel that they are less wanted, less important than other people. And every time that has happened in history, a movement grows that counters it. And it grows because people come together, people who do share, as the young people told us just a few minutes ago, the sense of hope. And I come from a background of Sikhism. And if I just reflect, this year is the 350th anniversary of the great Guru Gobind Singh, who brought together people to counter then a resident evil. And that was the evil of people trying to kill or manipulate other people. And we are in a world where the given word, what we say, how we say it, matters. And I think for some time now, many of us individually have felt we can't change anything. But collectively, and that's the message there, but it was the message from the young people. Collectively, of course we can. Hope comes from hopelessness. You can create a collective good. I've been in politics a long time. In fact, my journey in politics came because I was so angry about the discrimination that people of colour faced in the UK. I grew up in the UK in the 60s and 70s, and those who know the UK in the 60s and 70s would resonate with the messages we're hearing today. The messages of people disliking people because they're different. And yet we've so rightly been reminded today, it's those differences that we have in common. The world is a place of rich diversity. It's full of different people with different thoughts that we should celebrate and embrace. And instead, the narrative today in the world has become incredibly humanitarian-less. And I just think that instead of us thinking we can't do something, we should collectively find out what we can do. Because we cannot sleepwalk ourselves into allowing populists and populist messaging get the better of us. The world is actually full of very, very good people. The thing is, the very, very good people sometimes remain silent because they don't know how to collectively come together. And I'll re-emphasize the word collective over and over again, because I think it's been so underutilized by those of us who share a love for diversity, a love for humanity, and a real love for making sure that no one gets left behind. It was only a couple of years ago that all the countries on the planet decided that they were going to sign up to the Sustainable Development Goals, where nobody was left behind. It was only a little while ago we all signed up to the climate change in Paris, that we were going to tackle climate change because it was going to have a big impact on all of our lives. So if it's my brothers and sisters in Africa who have got no water or food, it will impact on our lives. And therefore, it's our duty to be able to have that sharing of belief that actually my brothers and sisters thousands of miles away matter. And yet, what have we done? We've vilified people for trying to make themselves better in the world. And instead of saying that what can we do to keep people in their countries and help them state build, like my friends here are doing, what we've said is, no, we don't want you, we don't like you, you are not part of us, and therefore you cannot share our space. And as a 10, 11-year-old, when I first looked at politics, I thought I would actually be able to see a different world. And what do I see? A world that is maybe the same, but maybe worse, because we should be better at it. We're more informed, there's better technology, there are more thinkers, there are supposedly more educated people on the planet. And I just hope, and I was really, really moved by the young people. And Elmer's story, you know, about people's human emotional intelligence, the ability to learn skills that actually see the good, the creative, the strengths of people, and not see people as burdensome, as people who are taking from you. Who gives us the right to say that just because we have the good fortune to be in a place where everything is in abundance, that we don't share? I am really grateful to organizations like my friends from the Brahmakumaris, who've opened my eyes to space of peace. I was having a chat this morning. I often feel as a politician like a hamster on a treadmill. You're constantly having to try and catch up with yesterday, and sometimes you lose sight of tomorrow. But my journey has been and remains one of hope. And that's my mission and message to you all. Actually, there are more good people. And therefore, it is the quantity gives us the advantage of saying we can change. And how do we do it? We find people who share our common beliefs. And there are millions in the world who do that. Because even in dangerous and difficult places, there are people who raise their heads above the parapet to be able to say that we can't stand by while our brothers and sisters are in sufferance. So for me, humanitarian plays a big role. My faith has been about reaching out to everyone. In fact, I was very lucky as a child, and I'm going to finish on this note. I was very lucky. I have parents who are Sikhs. I was born into a Sikh family, but I married into a Hindu family. But my mother is one of the greatest inspirations and visionaries I can have the great fortune of being associated with. And she taught us so much about reaching out. So on Sundays, when I was growing up, there were no temples. So I went to Sunday school. And my neighbours were Irish and Scottish on either side, who would take us to lots of events that were associated with their faiths. So I had the rich exposure of learning about faith from other people. But it also taught me that actually at the end of the day, we all share one thing. We're a human race. And human race should be about service to everyone. And that's what my faith taught me. My faith taught me that I needed to be a servant of the people. And often in public life, they say, we're the servant of the people. But the way people are disillusioned with politics is because often they become less of a servant and more of a master. But I think today's populism must make all of us wake up. And today it's time for another shift to another great collaboration of good minds, because we cannot allow hateful populism. I don't know why it's called populism, by the way, because to be quite frank, it's a few people disputing and dispelling out horrible rhetoric. So I don't know how you call it populism. I call populism what we're doing. I call it about popular events, about coming together and joining in on the popular message of love, the popular message of tolerance, the popular message of give, and the popular message of service. And I'm afraid there's less and less of that and more of the lessons of let's divide, let's not integrate, let's not serve. And so I'm hoping that as a child who was born in one country, the largest populace on the planet, India, the largest democracy on the planet, that they, because of their scale of size, are able to show tolerance. I hope my country, the oldest democracy on the planet, shows leadership, shows that actually, if you believe in something, you take some people with you and you don't separate them off. So I'll finish on that note, but I want to just end by saying it's always a joy to share a platform with great people who have done so much in their lives, because I always take a lot of learning away and realize sometimes how little I know. And it was that young lady, Malala Yousaf, who actually really did said something that was just so magnificent. The power of the pen. The power of the pen is so much stronger than fighting and the power of hate. So I hope that young lady, just like the young people before us who were on this stage, demonstrate that if we are able to expose them to hope, that they actually can do a lot of things in their lives, and so can we. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Thank you for this deep message of hope. Gulalai from Pakistan, thank you for sharing with us your story, your journey.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who organized this forum, and thank you to Johanna who invited me. It is my first Spirit of Humanity forum, and I'm very glad to be among people who are believing in interconnectedness, coming together to make this world a better place for everyone. I come from Pakistan. I know most of you are well-traveled and have knowledge about the world, but just to give you a bit of background from where I come from the northwest of Pakistan, which is one of the most difficult parts of the world for women. I grew up in a small village, Sawabi, in the northwest of Pakistan. And just to give you a bit of picture that in Pakistan, I think it is one of the most difficult parts for women, because even if you look at the literacy rate today, only 18% of the women have completed higher secondary education. Even today, more than 60% of the girls are getting married before the age of 16, thus not getting the opportunity even to complete their schooling or to be able to have vision for themselves as person, to have vision for the community, and to follow their dreams. When I was young, my mother was the only female entrepreneur in our village, and she was quite a celebrated woman in the village. But she was not celebrated because she was the only female entrepreneur in the village. She was celebrated because she was an obedient wife. My mother used to make beautifully, intricately embroidered cloths, the kind of one I'm wearing. She used to make such beautiful clothes. So women from all over the village, they would come to our home and ask my mother to make flowers for them on their dresses. So I grew up listening to the stories of those women. And it was from the stories of those women that I learned from a young age that what it meant to be a girl in my village, what it meant to be a woman. And I learned that in our village, the birth of boys was cherished. It was cherished by firing guns into the air, by celebrating, by sharing delicious food, while the birth of girls was mostly a matter of shame and sadness. Girls were raised to become obedient wives and usually married off before the age of 16, while boys were raised to become independent, controlling, aggressive, more masculine, and therefore boys learned from a very young age to see women as their property. I was able to go to school, and I remember that my cousins, as my female cousins, they would tell us that we are privileged. As a child, I couldn't understand why I was privileged, because I was sent to school. Why I didn't go to school. I wanted to play, but I was sent to school. But it was when one of my cousins, I realized how privileged I am. It's not a right. It was actually a privilege to go to school. It was not a right. I realized that when one of my own cousin, who was around my age, maybe 15 years, and she had always the dream of becoming a pilot. When she was taken out of school and married off to a man who was 10 years older than her, her dream was shattered. She had always wanted to become a pilot. She had this romance with uniform, flying aeroplanes and jets. In the next moment, she was wife of someone with whom even she couldn't connect at an emotional and personal level. That was it devastated me to see her dream shattered, and that was the point I realized that I'm going to school because I am born in a privileged family. If I was in another family, if I wasn't privileged enough, it means I could be her. And that was a moment of calling for me. I wanted to do at that moment, I couldn't save her, but I wanted to do something so that it won't happen to any other girl in my community. So me and my sister, who was almost my age, she's 1 year younger than me, my sister Sabah, we decided to do something which will change fate of the girls in our community. So we became the rebels of our family, and we started questioning anything which we found discriminatory. My siblings used to make fun of me because they thought it's like crazy, it's a crazy idea. Even thinking about equality was a very crazy idea then. 15 years ago, I was just 15 years and I was talking about equality and equal rights, and I deserve equal right. I deserve to be play as well. I deserve to go to better school. So, all of these things sounded crazy. But my parents could see our vision of equality. And when at time, because I had also seen that I couldn't save my own cousin. So I was not sure if I can actually bring some change. I knew that I want to bring change. So at that, when my grandmother saw it, she shared a story with me which gave me hope and the courage to do things which I'm doing today. I would like to share the story with you. So she told me that once there was a village where there was drought. It hadn't rained there for many years. And because of that, many people were dying because there was no food, their animals were dying, there was no water, no food, no cultivation. So it was in very bad shape. Then one day some clouds were passing through the village. And when the raindrops in the cloud, when they saw, they became sad. They had sympathy for them. But then every raindrop thought, it's small, what can it do? Even if it drop on the ground, it will be absorbed by the soil. It can't do anything. But then there was one courageous raindrop, and it said to itself, I will drop on the ground, no matter, even if I'm absorbed by the soil. I will play my part. I will do something. And then it dropped on the ground. And when other raindrops looked at it, they also got courage, and they also started flying, and they also started dropping on the ground. And then in few moments, it was a heavy rain, and then there was greenery, there was again water and food, and the village became a happy place. So that was the power of one raindrop. When one raindrop got the courage to contribute its part to the village, other raindrops followed, and the whole village changed. So when my grandmother told this story to me, it gave me a lot of hope and courage, and I started believing in my power that I can bring change as well. So me and my sister, we started visiting our neighborhoods, we started visiting our communities, and we started listening to girls. What are their issues? What bothers them? What change they want to bring in their life? And together we started discussing ideas on how we can make those changes which we want to see in our lives. And we gave this campaign name of Aware Girls. I was 16 then, my sister was 15, and we all, with other young girls, we started this campaign, Aware Girls, to enable girls to speak up for their rights and to create communities which will be driven by their values and their dreams. So that's how it started, and today we are working on the issues of political empowerment, and all the organization is driven by young women and girls. We work on issues like political empowerment of young women, giving human rights education to girls, giving them skills to speak up for their rights, connecting them to policymakers. One of the program which I really liked is about the political empowerment of young women, giving them voices to be enabled to be at the policy level, to contribute to the policy level and to the community level. So we started training young women on political leadership skills, and 2 years back, when local elections were happening, 10 of the young women who were trained, 3 of them were actually trained by the organization. They decided that they will run for local elections. But amazing thing about when you empower women, or when you facilitate their empowerment, women, they empower other people around themselves. They empower other communities. We had trained 3 women but when they were running for elections, they inspired other 7 women from their community to run for elections. So like we trained 1 person, and then 1 young woman, when she was running for election, she inspired 3 other women from her community. Hey, let's go. Elections are coming up. I think you have a great vision for your community. We both should run for election together. So those 3 women inspired 7 other women, and together 10 women from the organization, they ran for election, and all of them won the elections. And those women, those young women, they were not from any influential background who had experience in political processes. No, they were common women who were from very marginalized background, some were from religious minority groups, but they had started seeing their power. They had started seeing that they can drive their communities through their values of compassion, values of love, values of harmony. And now these women are sitting in these local councils making decisions for the communities. So when I look at these women, I started believing more in the power of women, that when we facilitate empowerment of one person, that one person create ripple effects, and started doing that. But while we were doing all these amazing works, and we thought we are making changes in our communities, we are making it a good place, security situations started becoming bad in Pakistan. It was in 2007, after 9/11, as you know, that 9/11 changed dynamics of many parts of the world, and so it changed dynamics in Pakistan as well. After Afghanistan was attacked, many militant groups, they created ties with the existent group in Pakistan, creating new militant movements in the name of Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and they started attacking different parts of Pakistan to destabilize the country. One part of Pakistan even went in the control of those Taliban groups, those militant groups. And when I looked at my city, Peshawar, I come from Peshawar, and it is known as the city of flowers. But in that time, it became the city of bomb attacks. And what was heartbreaking for me was to see that most of those attacks were done by young people. It was young people who were joining those militant groups, and they were engaged in killing. So seeing young people killing others and getting killed, it was heartbreaking for me. And but I also felt close to those young people who were joining this militant organization, because I had been schooled in the very same education system, and I could not sympathize but empathize with them on what make them make these decisions, because I had been through that journey in my schooling, when in that kind of radicalized schooling which teaches you hate, which teaches you intolerance, and my parents had helped me to unlearn all of those things which I was learning through an education system which was teaching us hatred, intolerance, lack of compassion. So because I felt close to them, I thought it is again my calling to help, to work with young people and to help them from being recruited in the militant organizations. So, and to enable them to create flourishing communities, to unlock their potential in making peace and development in their communities. So we started a group, a program, we called it Youth Peace Network. We started with a group of 30 young people. So at that time when the terrorist organizations were recruiting young people for militant activities, we started recruiting young people for building peace in their communities. And as I said, we started with a group of 30 young people. We sat together, and based on our own experiences, we identified 5 key factors which make young people vulnerable to the militant organizations, which pull them towards extremism and militancy. We identified those 5 key factors, and we decided that we will use same 5 key factors to pull them towards peace building, to pull them towards tolerance, compassion, and for pulling them towards contributing towards peaceful communities and prosperous communities. I would like to take you through those 5 elements on how we are using those 5 elements now to work with young people. So number 1 is interconnectedness. Militants, one of the strategies of the militants is that they disconnect people from each other. They attack institutions which connect people. They attack tools which connect people, such as music. Music connects people. So they destroyed, so they had killed artists, they destroyed places where people would come and play music. So one of the things that we started doing was that we started bringing people of different cultures, ethnicities, and faiths together, so that they can interconnect with each other and they can celebrate and live the beauty of it. And we have learned that once you bring people together, it becomes difficult to make them enemies towards each other. Once they're not connected, once you pull them apart, it becomes easy to make them enemy of each other. But when you create those links of interconnectedness, it is very difficult to call them into violence towards each other. So that is element number 1. The second element is that the militant organizations, they disconnect people from their indigenous identities and values. And once they are disconnected from their indigenous identities and values, it becomes very easy to manipulate those young people. Once you create an identity crisis for young people, once an identity crisis is created and then you give them another identity, a dream of caliphate, they become driven, it's easy to drive them towards that dream. So we reconnect young people with their indigenous identity, with their indigenous history and culture, and help them celebrate it by sharing stories with them about their indigenous heroes, by doing intergenerational dialogues in the public places. Hujra, in our culture, we used to have public places, community places known as Hujra, where, so we are trying to rebuild that, where elder generations come, they sit together with the younger generation and share stories of how life was for them, share stories about their culture, their history with them. The third element is militants. Militants give young people heroism, and they give one kind of hero to young people, that is martyr, and only one kind of glory, that is the glory of war. When I was growing up, my mentors taught me the glory of non-violent heroism, glory of compassion and harmony. So we are using that element to we are teaching non-violent heroism to young people, and we are making them heroes in their own life by enabling them to rebuild, by enabling them to rebuild their communities, to build peace in their communities. For example, I would like to share one of the story. For example, Jahangir Afridi, for example, Farooq Afridi, who received training from our organization. He comes from tribal areas of Pakistan. He himself had become a victim of the brutality of the Taliban when he was arrested for not following the dress code of Taliban in the tribal areas. So he had faced that detention, and when he was arrested by the Taliban, it affected him very badly, and he didn't want to return back to his village. So he came to Peshawar, where by chance he got connected to one of the members of our organization and was invited to take part in one of the peace building trainings that we were offering. And once he attended that training, he decided that he will go back to his community, he will reclaim his space. So he went back and he started a scholarship program for young people. He started raising funds locally. And just last month, he sent back 300 children to school, children who would otherwise have been left out of school, maybe have been ended up in radical madrasas where they could have been easily recruited in the militant organizations. But because he was able to raise those funds locally, he is now sending 300 children from his village back to school. So this is the power of non-violent heroism. When young people see they can bring better change in their communities, when they can see they have the potential, I think that they can be prevented and they can become more potential citizens. Other element is that the element number 4 is making young people feel worthy. The militant organizations make young people feel worthy through jihad, and we are using that element by making young people feel celebrated through their contributions in their communities. Young people start realizing their worth, they start realizing that they are worthy when they are able to contribute to their communities, such as Farooq Afridi. The last element of our working is that is approaching young people through other young people, through empathy. The 5th element is empathy. Young people have empathy for each other. It's not sympathy, but actually empathy. They understand each other. They understand what drives them, what values are driving them towards certain decisions in their lives. So young people, in our approach, young people approach other young people who are partners with us, who have been trained in the organization. They approach young people who are at the risk of radicalization, engage them in discussions, in study circles, in interfaith harmony dialogues, in community dialogues. Through different approaches, those young people are reached out to bring a change in their hearts and their mindsets. So this is how we are working. We are using those elements. We started with 30 young people. Initially, no one thought that we could bring any change, but now we are more than 500 young people working both in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and we're reaching out to more than 3,000 young people annually who are at the risk of radicalization and changing their lives and saving lives of many more. I would like to tell one last story of how it's changing lives of young people. When we were doing those trainings, there are also risks, because challenging patriarchy, empowering women, and countering radicalization, these are not easy things to do, and there's also a lot of it's also very challenging to work on these issues, and so we also faced a lot of negative propaganda against us on different social media groups. So there was one group which was talking about us as like, these are our enemies, they are westernizing the country, they are working against religion. We are not working against religion, but that's how they are working against religion. So there was one guy on that group, and he was like, okay, so look at her, she's a woman and she is working against the interest of this country. I will go and teach her a lesson. So he applied to one of our training, telling us that he's actually a very he's very passionate about peace building and he wants to work for peace. But actually, he said to us that he was coming to teach us a lesson in our training. So we selected him for the training because his application was really nice, and it seems that he wanted to build peace. And he said to us that when he came to the training, he was actually amazed to see that women, when he participated in all those discussions, he said that he was amazed that it was a group of women who were actually talking about making these communities a better place. And it was nothing against religion, it was nothing against the interest of the country. In fact, it was in the interest of the country to make it a better place. So the young man who had come to teach us a lesson became one of the most active members of the network. And when he went back, because he saw, like, our organization is like, it's all kind of like all young women organization, which is very different in the culture where I'm working. And even he said that on the first of the training when he came, it was like we were putting up banners and we were arranging chairs. So he said that culturally he was expecting that because a man had entered the room, we would ask him if he can put the banners for us, if he can help us with chairs. But we didn't do that. So it was like we were doing it. And that was, he said, a moment of realization for him. And he was like, wait, if women who face so many barriers in this culture, if they can do things, then why I, being a man and being privileged, why I can't do things to change my community? So when he went back, he actually, when elections were happening, he became the first person in the village who took his mother for voting. And his mother became the first woman from that village who went and casted her vote. He sent back all his sisters to school who had been dropped out for cultural reason, who had been dropped out of school. He sent back all his sisters to school. He convinced his family that if other girls, like if aware girls, if they can be the leaders, my sister can also be the leaders if they are given same opportunities. And he also started talking to the imams of the village on how they can use the same loudspeaker and mosque which they used to promote hatred or lack of compassion, how they can actually use it to promote tolerance and compassion. So this is the power of young people, and this is the power of compassion and empathy. Thank you for listening to my stories.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gulalai, for these sharing and testimonials. So touching to know that this is happening in the world, actually. And thank you for making this key difference between, it's not because we have compassion or empathy that we necessarily sympathize. That's a very key. We'll probably go back to that with the audience afterwards. Thank you. Emmanuel Bombande. So you have a deep experience also in peace building in Africa and around the world. We're looking forward to hear you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm humbled to be in your presence, all of you eminent people, young, middle-aged, and elderly. And I'm also very happy to share this stage. When we foster compassion and peaceful coexistence at community level, it has a way of affecting national discourse and even sub-regional. And so my journey would basically start from my own community. When was the moment in my life I felt that calling? Now, I come from Boku, which is in the upper east of Ghana, way up north of Ghana. And very quickly, to put you in the setting, in the colonial period in Africa, there were two approaches. And you know, there were two dominant colonial powers. The French ruled directly. And so at independence, it ended. The British chose what was called indirect rule. What indirect rule meant was that you ruled through the local chiefs. But people in their social organization did not all have chiefs. Some had chiefs, some did not have. And so the easy way out was the communities that did not have chiefs, the British found the nearest community that had a chief, and a prince was brought to rule over those who did not have chiefs. This was okay, as long as it was the colonial administrative arrangement. But come independence, and those who were now ruled over because the chiefs were brought to rule over them started to ask, Now we're independent. The British have left. Why are you still here? So this is the story in my hometown, intermarriages, very cosmopolitan, very energetic and dynamic community. But there was one source of tension, that the indigenous people, overwhelming majority, were socially organized through the spiritual world, in which the mediator between the people and their God was the spiritual head. And because that could not be recognized politically, the nearest kingdom, the Mampusi, a prince was brought to rule over them. But after independence, that kingdom stayed on. And so the conflict was between the indigenous people who were spiritually organized versus those who were brought to be dominant. And I came home to visit my parents when I was preparing my advanced level examination. And violence erupted in incredible ways. Houses being burnt, the town, sporadic shooting. And my mother looked at me and said, I wish you were not visiting now. And for me, I took that, it was very difficult. Anyway, to cut the long story short in this setting, that was when the intuitive moment was, when I grow up, I want to work for peace. Because how come that people who are so close can be so violent against one another? And that was it. Then I went through university. But as if the spiritual world was directing me, I met two great people. One of them, many of you in this room would have met and known, John Paul Lederach. And the other one from Ethiopia, Hezekiah Asifa. And so from Ghana, my journey then went to the east of Africa. And this is how I met these two great scholars and authors and practitioners. And our work looked at the genocide in Rwanda, the Horn of Africa. It then also sent me to two institutions in the United States for studies. And this then became the revealing moment in which the West African space in itself was empty when you talk about peace building. Southern Africa was a bit more endowed, and Eastern Africa also. And so I always then held the view that, passionately, if we could find mechanisms for people to sit and talk, the narrative of the past could be transformed for that compassion and peaceful coexistence. Now, you can talk about the analysis and the narrative of the past. That was then. And I always argue that the whole purpose of independence was to take our destiny in our own hands. So it's not about the history of what the British did or the French did. It's about what we are doing as independent states. And that is why I became passionate about the institutions and the structures we build locally, beginning at the community level, to be able to serve the purpose of dialogue, and for that narrative to be owned by the people who have experienced conflict. Because they are the better placed men and women who know exactly where they feel the pain and how that pain might not be completely healed, and that the outsiders can help assuage the pain, but they are the only ones who know where the pain is and how to deal with it. And in this journey, I met a Liberian in the United States who was studying to be a banker and ended up being a refugee in Cote d'Ivoire. And with the help of our mentors and professors in the institutions we're studying, we started what has now become very credible and present across West Africa, the West African Network for Peace Building. A civil society engagement of men and women, and people like Lema Gbowe, who you know from Liberia, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, was our first coordinator for the Women in Peace Building Network in Liberia. And as we did that, the attitude and vision was about collectivity that is informing the local. And so in each country, we sought to establish a national network coordinated from Ghana through the regional coordination. And whilst we did that, we were able to interface and engage very strongly with partners across the world. And individuals who are part of great institutions. And one of the people I also met in this process, who has inspired me, happens to be in this room, Ambassador Ragnar, a Swedish diplomat, who for some reason will repeat dialogue and dialogue and dialogue 10 times a day when you are with him. And this would send me to the Fulker Bernadotte Academy, where I begin to share experiences, particularly with UN staff. And so this journey then would continue in ways that now made it possible at institutional level for us to establish the West African Network for Peace Building, which then also allowed for a political engagement with decision makers. Because our good sister from the European External Action, when she is engaging in West Africa, she recognizes the very important role of civil society groups and political decision makers. But how do you make that engagement when the leadership and the ownership is not in the region? And so our advocacy, policy making started to talk about good governance, and that you cannot shift the blame elsewhere. You cannot have a leader who wants to be a lifetime leader and expect peace in that country. And so the civil wars of West Africa that you know very well did not respect boundaries. It might have started in Liberia, but it spread across the border into Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, and Guinea. And so what seems to be a national or local conflict has the potential to become a regional conflict. And out of those policy decision making, ECOWAS became a very strong institution, originally established for the integration of West Africa, beginning with the economy. But realizing that, forget about your economic integration, when you are not able to have the type of political space, the peace, that now makes it possible for economic integration, now brought to the forefront mechanisms for conflict prevention at regional level. Grounded in treaties, protocols, rules. And that is why when the president of Gambia, after losing the election, wanted to hold on, everybody said, wait a minute, you were part of the signatories. That recognizes that good governance is when you lose an election, you leave. And so collectively West Africa said, no, you must leave. And when the region starts to speak in that voice, they get the full support of the Security Council of the United Nations. They get the full support of the European Union, the African Union. So it becomes impossible for a dictator to entrench himself. And by the way, most of the dictators throughout West Africa have been himself. The only woman, Helen Johnson Sirleaf, has been wonderful. And this is then when West Africa started to transform. So that the stories of civil war now gave space for a very dynamic region of respect for human rights, democracy, and good governance, though not at the same level in each country. But progress has been made. But the reason I say this is not to praise West Africa, but to say that comparatively, look at the difference between West Africa and Central Africa. The difference is because there is a collective leadership that the international community can rely on. And I'm not trying to spite Central Africa, but by the time you get to Central Africa, there's complete disconnection about collective decision making. And so when there is civil unrest in Central African Republic, political but seen as a religious conflict, who is leading where? Who has ownership for what? And so we saw the massacres in Central Africa. Look at what is happening in Southern Sudan. And I could go on and on. But the point I want to emphasize is how my local calling and experience helped. And in that process in Ghana, dialogue now, beginning with my hometown, made it possible to have a new narrative in which political legitimacy about who is chief or not should give way to how we coexist by talking about the problem. And when you talk about the problem, you put mechanisms. So we have our different ethnic groups come together to form local peace committees that then engage each other to prevent violence. And that has, if you would call it, had a bottom-top effect in which at the level of the entire country, we have the National Peace Council. And that on the issues of building peace, there are women and men, very highly respected, religious leaders, community leaders that you can rely on to be the mediator, even amongst the politicians. And that then would inform the region in which different countries are beginning to form these different peace councils. And whilst being actively engaged in my country and in the region and across West Africa, it was time to leave the institution that I had co-founded and spent a lot of my life on for a very simple reason. After being executive director for 10 years, the question was, if we are advocating that West African leaders should not be there too long, when you are the head of a civil society for more than 10 years, you are there for too long. And so the good example is that you must leave. And that was the point I went to work with the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel, in which the same issues of conflict prevention, in which elections became very, if you call it, sources of tension. And peaceful transitions could bring an entire country down. You saw Cote d'Ivoire, in which the civil war was exacerbated out of elections. And so the whole idea was, how do you work to prevent, rather than react when the conflict would have taken place and it's a bit too late. And a lot of that engagement was going on. And then the president of Ghana asked me to come back and be deputy minister for foreign affairs. And I was there up to January, when the party on which I was deputy minister lost to the current government. And we peacefully handed over. It's good to lose an election, because then you can look back and use the lessons you have learned to even be better the next time. And without being too long, this has been my journey, but it started from the local community, and it informed what I did, not just in West Africa, but across the Africa region, and with many of you I have met in partnerships globally. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Very rich. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are running a little bit late, but it's so passionate to listen to them. It's not possible to take anything away. But I'm going to already ask our director, Joanna, to think about how much more time you're going to give us. I'll ask you that question afterwards. Thank you for bringing us to Beijing, China, and telling us about your story.
Okay. May I stand up to speak?
Please, as you're comfortable.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Yu Xia from China, Beijing. And today, our topic is caring others. And I want to, from the educator perspective, find our way through Chinese traditional culture. This is China. For this year's Spirit of Humanity Forum, the theme focused on caring for a world in transition, which focused on building a spiritual foundation for a peaceful and loving world. Peace and love can only be shared when we can find peace and love within ours that we can then share with others, just like today. This peace and love can be nurtured when we are able to find happiness and meaning. Peace and love, the two key words. Lovely. This is one of our educational goals in China, to find happiness and meaningful from traditional culture. Please allow me to share my thoughts about seeking happiness and meaningful from Chinese traditional culture. Actually, I'm sure that many countries share this same goal regarding finding and retraining what is valuable from our traditional heritage. It turns out that our cultures also have intersected and continue to intersect. Okay. Here, I learned this from this two experience that I had. Now I'll tell you two stories. The first story is about That happened in October 9000. I was sent as a representative of China to Japan to take part in the 14th Seminar on Special Education of Asia-Pacific region, a series of United Nations educational, scientific, and culture conference organized by UNESCO. I looked forward to attending the cinema and also visiting some schools, not only to learn how the Japanese education system functioned, but also to share some successful Chinese educational practices. That was my first time to go to Japan, and I had never learned Japanese. I know Chinese and English. I learned that due to the organizer not having arranged to pick me up when I had to navigate my way from the airport on my own. You know, the trip after I arrived in Japan, it needed 3 hours to transfer by 3 stations by subway. So I worried about how long the trip would take me and what time I would arrive at the hotel in the night. Although I didn't understand the spoken Japanese language, I thought that I would be able to understand the general meaning of the Japanese character since we shared similar writing. I realized that the two countries shared so much more than just our writing. I arrived at the Yokosuka and was immediately and deeply impressed by what I saw. I noticed that buildings in Kyoto looked very much like those from the Chinese Tang Dynasty. Women wore kimono that looked similar to the Chinese clothing. Yes, also like Tang Dynasty. Later, the organizer entertained us with a Japanese hot pot meal, which was practiced the same way as a hot meal in China, very similar. Look at the writing. Some are similar. From up above, that was Tang Dynasty's clothing for women, and this is kimono. Hot pot. In the left is a left part in our hometown, Sichuan. It's very delicious. At the meeting, I met a UNESCO official from Japan. She was very kind and told me that our two countries enjoy the same culture. Tradition, such as words, architectures, and clothing, food, among other things. This experience left me wondering, how much has Japan kept the Chinese traditional culture? This led me wondering about how my home country, how much has China cherished and preserved its own inheritance. The second story is about that happened in November 2007. I was at the invitation of Taiwan Shanling Fudan Catholic University professor. I went to Taiwan to attend the Asia-Chinese Action Research Seminar. This is my only first time to Taiwan. an opportunity for discussions, sharing, and reporting among primary and secondary schools and university students, and also residence exchanges. During the trip, I visited the elementary school of the famed academic award-winning director An Li. The name of the school, of his school, class translate 仁义礼智信. That these are the traits that the school and aims to develop in its community, which makes perfect sense. His school I ever visit. Benevolence, 仁, is a heart of love, and righteousness, 义, is justice. Courtesy, 礼, is a specific vision to handle interpersonal relationships. And wisdom, 智, is knowing right from wrong. Trust, 信, is good faith. I found this interesting things since the five Chinese traditional ethical traditional culture development, the most core factor in the value system. In China, Taiwanese traditional culture education has likewise stressed this dimension of moral education curriculum. Then I then wondered how our two districts would assess the successful of this focus. And these made me think about how improve Chinese education to cultivate ideals, values, and knowledge. Studentaneous teachers should not only teach to the curriculum that will be tested and evaluated, but also complement that teaching with moral guidance. The goals, our Beijing Outstanding Teacher Training Program, primary and secondary school teachers have been praised to focus on ensuring that the students score well in high school and college entrance examination scores. As often, the teachers are evaluated on their students' scores, and many earn bonus based on their students' scores. So it's I think it's a disaster. Some teachers only pay attention to knowledge that will prepare students to score well, while the students' moral education is ignored. Yesterday, I shared some opinions from your group, just like this. The same problems in education, I think. Okay. In traditional Chinese thinking, we regard teachers as the gardeners of the Eden, who are charged with nurturing souls, therefore transforming teachers, and their work is a key to reforming the educational system in our country. And we do this by making it to look at our roots. So teacher is very important. And at this morning, Mark told us his story. That's true. Therefore, we have designed the integration of traditional culture and culture and in the training program, project learning curriculum, we hope that the study of the traditional culture will awaken the teachers, focus on traditional culture, core values. In the process, we address the complete educational needs of the students and cultivate the students speaking justice, faith, and love to build people of virtue. Already, I have begun to see the fruit of our evidence over the last 10 years, whereby through training, some teachers are able to reclaim the dignity of the profession and take courage to embrace and embody core values in their day-to-day practice, including care, respect, love, compassion, and integrity. Okay. So I ask now, what is the spirit in the traditional culture of China to ensure that students have a peaceful, loving, and meaningful life? In this period of change, how can we aim to reflect the core values of humans? One thing is certain. We need to draw nutrients from Chinese traditional culture for thousands of years. Chinese civilization has had its own unique value system. And in fact, traditional culture continues to be deep rooted in Chinese heart, influencing the Chinese way of thinking and behavior, and influencing the culture of its Asian neighbors, who also have contributed greatly world civilization. Many nations' culture, beliefs, and practices reflect the Chinese traditional culture and national spirit. We need to learn and master with all kinds of thoughts in traditional culture to lay the foundation for students' outlook on the world and on life. In China, throughout our history, educators have always intended to integrate human values in education. According to the Confucius, one of our greatest teachers, the true path to becoming a virtuous person is by revealing one's inner light. And the part that a teacher plays is to help the child connect with their spirit. In the face of growing divisions and widening gaps between the communities and societies. In today's world, peaceful relationships and global harmony can only be achieved through this kind of education. An education that kindles human spirit. Oh. How do we cultivate, once again, these core values in our educational system? In the past 30 years, I have witnessed a catastrophic decline of public morale as an unintended consequence of the rapid economic economic growth in China. And this is reflected tragically in education by a shift from a focus on cultivating the virtuous person to an orientation towards high-stakes testing. Quality education is increasingly represented by the test course. So, ignoring the nurturing of the human values and ignition of inner light that was once at the core of education. Spirit enriching learning at the heart of the healthy growth of students' personality and character through aesthetic, emotional, and ethical engagement is further denied. I think that a successful education should not only cultivate the students' academic ability. More important is to cultivate students' respect, tolerance, cooperation, freedom, and rationality and dignity, so that we can relate to and with others. These should be the goals of education. Indeed, I hope for the growth of humanity and the enrichment of the human spirits lies in the transformation of education. Although China still has a long way to go, I'm glad that I have the opportunity here at the Spirit of Humanity Forum to be inspired by many other like-minded leaders in this journey. May we support each other in the creating a better world together. Thank you. Chinese cynic.
Thank you, showing us. Thank you very much. What diversity in the vision of peace building and bringing more compassion through the world. So now the floor is yours. We have 20 minutes where you can ask questions or make comments to our guests. And the microphone is here, and we'll go one question after another. First one is there.
Thank you. I'm Peter Hesse from Germany, and I'm very glad to have come to this most encouraging panel here. In every single aspect, it was most encouraging. I'm particularly glad about all was great, and also the hope in China, of course. But what I'm particularly touched by what happened in Africa, because finally I'm involved also not in practice only, but also in development politics. And China is a big problem for all of us because it's beautifully diverse, but it is so diverse that it's difficult to find a solution. I really like your approach, Mr. Ghana. Sorry, the name. And this was encouraged me because finally my country, Germany, has finally considered Africa to be important. I'm very happy about it because it's so important for the future. Yeah. Not only because many Africans like to come to us, which I understand right now, although it's not so perfect in Europe either. Yeah. But I want to add in one little aspect from my own experience. I have learned a lot in about 35 years of practice outside in the world, in practical development work with humans. And I came there in the beginning with the belief that I knew what to do. And I had to learn that this is not right. I cannot do anything I want, but I have to first learn. And this learning led to one conclusion. First of all, generally speaking, human development only starts from bottom up. It's different with governments. We cannot talk about this. This is a different story. But I mean, human development, individual, must come from the bottom. And one thing I made wrong, and I really hope my government and other people who are doing this on a larger scale take this learning, and not just as an individual learning, which I fully have gone through, but take it as a reality. First thing we have to do is learn to be humbly listening. And that is difficult, of course, in larger communities. Because whatever happens in a community, and that is care for each other in community is the title today, is significant for what can happen there successfully. Nothing will happen if it's imposed from top. Everybody will accept if you give them something, but nothing will happen afterwards. But it's really a truth which is so basic that I would wish that not only all of us take this into our hearts, because we are all touched somehow when we travel in the world. It's easy to receive wake-up calls. Just open your eyes and you'll be woken up. This is so easy. When you see the environment outside, when you come with a better situation for traveling, around you is usually great poverty and misery. And if you see this, you cannot rest quiet. Everybody's human heart is moving for this, and this is a subject here in the seminar also. But you have to take consequences. Consciousness is the first step, but it has to be a follow-up by love in action. And this love in action has to be learned, humbly listening, and then acting in a way with the people there. Cooperate, really. And anything that starts from the bottom, if you help there, will be successful. And nothing will be successful if you just implant it from top. And this needs our heart's commitment, and exactly this subject in this conference is leading basically to this attitude. But let's not only stay at this attitude must have consequences, as I call it, in love and action.
Thank you very much.
Since I have the microphone, I just briefly wanted to say that each of you presented the values and the nature-based, decolonized perspectives of your original cultures, your indigenous cultures. And I think that was just very, very powerful. And I wanted to just acknowledge the appreciation of that.
Thank you. Behind.
Thank you. I'm Sara from Argentina. And in line with what you have said, I want to propose to go further to that question that was the question for our first day, and move to a question, something like that, saying, how do we ensure that we are open to listen to others' values with curiosity, with genuine curiosity, and how can we be prepared to clarify our purpose with other purpose, just to have one purpose in common? Because I've heard that you all have learned just listening to others' perspective. Thank you.
So thank you, Sarah. This is an interesting question, which it's been applauded, so I imagine that many people are actually wondering, because it's come out from most of you, which is this question of, I think, Gulala, you were saying, it's not because I empathize with somebody that I'm sympathizing. And I think this question goes in this direction. Well, actually, how are you actually managing diversity when it comes to you?
So it is the big question of the day. And when you have big political leaders make statements that actually don't bring people together, where does society look? And somebody said it's not got to come from the top, but from the bottom. But I think it comes from the top and from the bottom. I think there is a political need, and I think there is a big vacuum politically. And I think on the ground, I think there is a feeling that things can't change, and therefore people feel often not able to feel that they can gather a movement. But it's that time, it's when it's that time that I think it's really important for those thinkers politically And actually, Africa has been a real source of mixed understanding. People like me who have looked at Africa as actually one of the big saviors of the 21st century have not been able to demonstrate how collectively that strength can be energized. And yet we still continue to allow particular parts of the world to create and generate the general narrative. And sir, in your own country, where there was a brave decision to take people that were fleeing their lives, the leadership was very strong in what they wanted to do, but the voices around it were so disruptive. And I think that is where we've got to really try and focus, and to the lady's point, is get a common narrative. And that's done with a mixture of civil society, political society, and actually the corporate world. I don't want to exclude the corporate world, because I think the corporate world benefits whichever way the decisions are taken.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to give an answer? Emmanuel?
I thought the Honorable Chair of the European External Action has beautifully said it. If we can bring our inner core values, as we've been talking about here, into politics, we can begin to recognize that diversity is appreciated not just because we should, but it will be appreciated in the different understanding of what Gulay has been using, empathy, and you have been re-echoing. And in that is the type of human solidarity in which, yes, in this world, there are some nations that are powerful and well-endowed and wealthy, and some are weak. But the wealthy and endowed would be leading to self-destruction if they think the weak can just be wiped off. When you hold the hand of the weak and help them to stand up, this whole global community becomes beautiful for all of us to share. And I think that is not yet predominant, but the narrative is changing, the message of hope is there, and as you said, listening to the young people this morning, there is hope, and I think that there is going to be a new generation of leadership that understands the world to be more integrated and better when we are together, rather than the type of discrimination we continue to hear in some places.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other up there? Where's the microphone? So it's all the way on the other side. Or it's, oh, that's better. The microphone's traveling, it's getting to the other side of the room.
It's called cooperation.
Cooperation, exactly, yeah.
Thank you, panelists. David from the U.S. This is actually a question directed to Mr. Bombande.
Yes.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the Mo Ibrahim Foundation and the prize on good governance. I don't know if you have any perspective on that, but I've been researching their work for a few years. Just curious to hear if you have any thoughts.
First of all, I think it's a very important initiative because it has clearly set the benchmarks that should clearly describe what type of leadership we want in Africa today. And as you have seen, the bar is very high, and I think it should be maintained there. Because basically what you are beginning to see is that a few African leaders are going to reach and cross that bar. Though Africa as a whole is making significant progress at the level of leadership, there is still, in my view, huge challenges. And so this is one mechanism, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation initiative, that basically says, look, there is something here that you can refer to when we talk about leadership. The reason why I say this is because the Africa peer review mechanism should have helped us to get to that level of excellence. But because it's a voluntary process in which it is when you submit yourself that you can be peer reviewed, it has not helped very much. But the initiative of Mo Ibrahim is making it possible for people to know that why is it that for 2 years consecutively we've not had any leader win that prize? it means there are issues that we need to still deal with. And I appreciate the foundation's work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Two last questions.
Two more questions, and then Clement, and there's one down here, so we'll finish down here afterwards.
Hello. So thank you for sharing these stories of the different ways that you've been involved in your worlds. I was wondering if you could tell us, I'm always really interested in the things I can find out from people that I could only find out from you. And I think the only thing I can only find out from you is what happens in your heart. And I was wondering if you could share with me a story from, like, inside yourself, how you care for yourself and your own inner values from inside you.
Tough question.
So, well, that's a very deep question, and as the four, maybe would one of you like to answer?
Do you want to start?
Everybody's turning around Kulala. I don't know why.
There's a pressure on me.
Yes.
Actually, you know what, Kulala? I think this is a beautiful question for you, if I may, because one thing that touched me very much when we were preparing is you were saying, well, I don't know if I'm really a spiritual person, and what you're doing
Don't
for
embarrass me
me
publicly. Don't embarrass me in public.
But I think, well, for me, I mean, I'm sure everybody here is so touched by your spirituality in the sense that what you are offering to the world. So maybe this can be a good opportunity beyond the words of spirituality or religion. What is really moving you in your life to do this?
I think it's important for me as a person to keep a check on myself when I make decisions on how it is impacting me and how my decision is impacting my family, my community. And I try not to act just as an individual, but to act as part of community, as part of family. So that is one of the way I keep check on my own values. And on the thing that what moves me is, for me, it's very important that what is the impact of the work that I'm doing in my community. If I am able to bring change in the community, if I'm able to facilitate a change, the process of change, if I'm able to facilitate the process of empowerment that is helping, or not helping, actually enabling people to see their potential, if I am able to do that, then I see value in my work and then I continue it. For example, 3 years, as I said, that it is very challenging to work on issues like countering radicalization, preventing young people from getting radicalization, trying to build peace in difficult situations that can be very challenging. You can be attacked. We were attacked several times, but when we were attacked for the first time around 2 years ago, that was a moment where, of course, it was frightening to be attacked. It was frightening to see the whole family at risk. But then that was the point where we had to decide, do we self-censor ourselves? Do we stop speaking up? Do we stop working because it is threatening for me as a person? Or we continue the work that we do? And when we were discussing it with our colleagues and with our family, one thing which came up very strongly was that there are certain people who are trying to silence us because our work is having an impact on the lives of people. And if it is bringing a change, if it is bringing an impact, then it means that we need to be more stronger and we need to raise the voices with much strength. It means that we have to speak up and we have to continue this. So this is a signal for us to amplify the work rather than self-censoring ourselves. So that is one, we try, by we I mean I and people in our organization, we try not to be driven by fear, but to be driven by hope and the impact.
Thank you.
So when I was 5, I was washing my hands in a they were so-called relatives. And my aunt said to my mother, "I don't want your daughter dirtying my sink." And I assumed that she meant because my hands were dirty. But actually it was because I'm rather dark-skinned. And at 5 years old, it stays in your head forever. And I was growing up in a country where there was the ability for people that weren't of color to call people of color names, be horrible to them, and it impacts on how people rate you in society. So when I was 11, and I was asked by the teacher to write an essay on what I wanted to do when I grew up, I thought I'd be the Prime Minister of India. Because in India, everybody looked like me. Until I realized that even in India, people discriminated because you're of different colors. So the journey has been one of looking and taking head-on people that discriminate. I was lucky to be born in India in a city called Amritsar. In fact, my mother went into labor in the Golden Temple with me. So my journey, I think, in this world comes from a brilliant place. But it taught me one thing. I'm not going to wait for somebody else to stand up for me. And it's like you. I just find good people to come on the journey with me. But I realized that even those prejudices that I grew up with continue to happen. And therefore, when I started really talking about the strengths of Africa with the Africans, I was asked, well, why are you interested in Africa? And I think the problem is we box ourselves into particular identities. And my inside gut tells me that if you were to rip you open and rip me open, the problem is actually we're pretty much the same. And we've got to start realizing that. So I remember never visiting that aunt again because my mother decided that was the most offensive thing that my mother could hear for her child. And I think all of us as parents, as members of society, should stand up for everybody and anybody. It doesn't matter if they're related to you or not, because the pain should be as much. And that's where my journey has been. And I've got two brilliant children. My daughter is actually doing a master's in international development at the LSE, and her mission is to help state build. Because until we help people state build, get good governance, I'm afraid we're going to have this all the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're going to be closing on these notes, and I suggest that we just take a minute because we have a gift from you. When we were preparing yesterday, as you understood, we went into deep sharing together, and suddenly you said, oh, I play an instrument which is 2,000 years old. And do you want to listen to what my teacher is playing with it? So I think you're trying to show, but I think Rek, our brilliant technician up there, which we could applaud because we could thank him for all the technical work he's been doing. So, and there you are. See, that's his brilliance. He's just put already the...
Yes,
so
this is a...
Do you want to say a word about this?
Yes.
Just one word?
This is the oldest instrument of China, guqi. And this music named Liang Xiaoying. And these will play at the national festival days with your family and with your friends. And now you can close your eyes. Just listen, sharing.
Let's check.
imagine in the moonlight with your friends and your family.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our four panelists for the session.